The King of Podcasts Radio Network proudly presents the Broadcasters Podcast. Here is the King of Podcasts.
Welcome to episode 280 of the Broadcasters Podcast, broadcasterspodcast.com. You find the show Apple, Amazon, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and all past episodes. Also on YouTube at King of Podcasts. You can find it all there. Tonight on the program, we're going to go through what has been 30 days now since the Writers Guild of America went on strike against the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers. We're going to basically go a little bit and see what, if any, progress or what has been done so far on behalf of the writers to really show their solidarity and to show that, hey, the streaming issues, the AI issues, the demands that are above and beyond extra money, what matters to the writers, and the fact that the Directors Guild is not trying to get a deal done with the AMPTP yet either, because their contract is coming up now. So they're going to go along with the writers and directors in hand. They're going to be brothers in arms, and the actors that are under sag-aftra, they're also going to be aligned with their fellow writers and directors to keep the strike going, and Hollywood has to go ahead and change. It's all because of the digital disruption. So with streaming, one of the things I'll tell you is, like, streaming doesn't give enough credence for what these writers, directors, all the staff does in Hollywood. Because already, you look at what these big corporations are doing right now anyway. Remember, a lot of content's being done on streaming. It's given a lack of a quality factor. When I talk about how these bigger companies are now changing their tune when it comes to exhibition, when it comes to putting movies in theaters. Hey, if you want something to be good, if you want to prove that something of content is good quality, then put it on a major platform. Try to get some advertisers from it. Try to get some bodies to go watch the movie ahead of time. So when it comes to Amazon, Apple Plus, right? They're putting movies out. They're going to put it out there for limited release or a widescreen release. See what they can make of it so they can give it some credibility for the award shows, for the people that are watching on streaming. Because I'll tell you what, Netflix is going to make a mistake by not respecting that the content that they make, they don't have any confidence that their content is so good they could put it up and preview it, especially the movies. TV shows I know they're not going to do. But let's just say when it comes to their movies, hey, I saw a commercial tonight during the NBA Finals. Arnold Schwarzenegger is promoting all the action-adventure movies, right? Gal Gadot has a new movie. You got Schwarzenegger has a new series on Netflix. And then what? Chris Hemsworth is doing another... What was that movie he did? I forget the name of it now. But he's doing a sequel of a movie he already did. Maybe it'll come up with me. I'm not going to go looking up for it right now. I'm doing this on real time. Okay, so the lack of quality is a factor. The lack of what shows are being done in production, and what, obviously the pay is important to the writers and directors, but still, it comes down to the fact that the AI part, that what if Hollywood and these big corporations say, you know what, we don't need that many writers. We can use some AI, use some human content, and we can just have somebody just rewrite it for us. We can use machine learning to take care of the part. The streaming and the fact of, you know, and I've seen videos on TikTok this week that were trying to dispute, oh, but they're only making $40,000. They're making what, $40,000 an episode or something like that. Some like number they give, like, oh, they're making $120,000. But yeah, they're also working like 13 weeks of the year. And remember, the money that they're putting in there, these writers and directors, they don't get to go and live like meager plebeians like you and me. They're living in California. Unless they're moving somewhere and they're coming out to California to work. Like, their cost of living is a lot because they have to live the part of Hollywood. They just can't be out there. Like, they have to work with all these people, so they have to live a cost of living that's higher up. And because everything costs so damn much in California, they have no choice. Or New York. They have no choice but to have to go ahead and be given a little bit more. But it's not only that. It's the money that these corporations are making anyway. Off of subscriptions. If they're not, well, there's a problem there. That's the part of the model that says, well, you know what? If you have all these TV shows that you have scripted and you're not willing to go and put your money where your mouth is and put them on cable or network, okay? All these media corporations, except for Netflix, they all have a place to go, or Apple. Okay, that's another exception. But all the other major streaming platforms, they have cable and network options to go with. Paramount Plus has CBS, Paramount Network, Showtime, whatever they got. Well, Showtime's over on, Showtime, yes. And then you think about, let's look at what? Disney Plus? You got ABC, you got Disney Channel, you got Freeform, you got a lot of places to go. But they're not willing to take that programming and move it over. Now, it's not a matter that, oh yeah, we're not going to get the audience over there. No, you're not. But what you are going to do is you're going to give those shows credibility. Because the people want to be able to just watch the shows the way they want to watch it. But you want to also change the way people perceive your shows. So then when Netflix puts out a show, Night Agent or whatever, if they're not getting a lot of buzz or a lot of marketing behind it, if they're just willing to just put the show on the platform, thinking, well, the Netflix people are just gullible, they'll just watch anything for the price we got. Well, what are you going to do when you're going to have those ad-supported tiers and people are going to start watching the ads? And even though they spend less on the ad support tier, what if you put the price up again on programming? $18, $20, $22 a month. You're now cracking down on the password protected sharing, right? How many of those Netflix subscribers are going to stay around? You're playing with fire. Netflix, you're playing with fire. And even though, we got our own deal with the Writers Guild and all this, well, there's also some issues with that too. But across the board, scripted programming is at risk right now. But this has happened before. But this is going to be a longer fight than 2007. This is going to be a longer fight than 1980. Because the digital disruption has forced us here. This impasse, this is the right time to buckle down. Of course, it's a bad time for directors, for writers, for all this staff to not be working right now because inflation, the economy, a pending recession. There's a lot of problems right now. People are not doing well. So to have to not be working and be out of a job, and what the motion picture funding, the MFTP, some organization that handles that, assistance for all these Hollywood types behind the scenes. I was going to pull the story on it, but I decided not to. They are having to spend more money and helping out all these people more than ever. And the Alliance of Motion Picture and TV Producers, they're probably not budging at all right now with the fact that, okay, because instead of the increase of money and benefits, it doesn't matter. It's the other things right now, the writer's room, the mini writer's room, the issues when it comes to AI, all those issues we talked about extensively. Episode 276 and 275, I talked about it. You want to go back to those if you want the whole story behind this. But 30 days later, things have gotten worse because now the dominoes begin to fall. The domino effect where here we are, Directors Guild is going to go on strike. And second, the SAG-AFTRA folks, the actors, actresses will also be going to that. And the other thing that's a shame, yeah, look, they're getting a little bit of press right now because, we're coming out, we're walking with them on picket lines. What happens when all these actors and actresses now want to start talking about strike? Once we get to that point where we're 3 months into this. Hollywood doesn't want this to happen. They don't want these actors and actresses to start talking about strike. They want this finished by then. But the way this is all set up, they're in a tough spot. So let's go into the stories of what's going on here. A lot of stuff's been written for the 30-day deadline right now, where we're at, because a lot is going on. And now the Directors Guild's a part of this mess. The Writers Guild says they're not expecting the Directors Guild deal to end the strike. So in 2008, the Alliance, the AMPTP, did get a deal with the Directors Guild set up first. And it was a pattern for the deal that ended the writer's strike after 100 days. So 2008 was the last time we had this big writer's strike. But getting a deal with the directors, and then the directors following suit, and then basically making the writers cave in, was how we got to this. Now, 15 years later, there are no divided unions. The Writers Guild said the Hollywood guilds are united in a way they weren't in 2008, and they are not going to be forced to go along with pattern bargaining. The WDA says the essence of the strategy is to make deals with some unions and tell the rest that's all there is. It's gaslighting, they said, and it only works if unions are divided. And the strike will only end when the companies agree to negotiate on our full agenda. You listen to that? The Writers Guild want all their demands met. This time they're going to get it. They have to. Is it right? Am I going to sign it all with the corporations? I don't know. Listen. What I got to say is what I said before. It's the corporation's fault. It's Hollywood's fault. They got to this point. All these media corporations that handle all this content. Okay, you got into the streaming wars together. You did it because you were losing money on advertising. And then you move over and try to do streaming. And you thought, well, you're going to get subscriptions and, things are going to go through the wazoo. And, you'll get more than enough subscriptions to go at that low price you're going to give them off the top. Of course it was going to get increased. Well, that's going to start happening. We've talked about that. And now what happens? Then all this content, you're going to come across and use all your intellectual property and just going to go and recreate content. You want to do that? Go right ahead. But you know what's going to happen? I could have told you. I told you back in 2020. Hell, I had all the time in the world in lockdown to talk about it. And now, where you're at is the quality of your content has diminished. You could have made some money on the advertising for the shows. You could have done that. You could have still been marketing and promoting all these new shows you put on streaming. There's a bunch of shows you have that you could have done something with. You could have put them out, put a sneak preview together, do something. When Paramount Plus or Paramount Network would go out and they'll put this show, Lords of Dogstown, or they'll put the Sylvester Stallone show, Tulsa King, right? Yeah, we'll put one episode there. One episode as an appetizer. Oh, and that's going to be enough to make you pay $10, $12 for Paramount Plus. Really? And they don't understand. Sneak preview needs to be much more than that. You need to go ahead and give more to these people. And, there was nothing wrong about if you wanted to put a show out there and say it was once a week and make people go through the whole thing, right? But then, of course, if you're streaming, you're going to spoil the whole thing. Well, look, what you should do is, there's got to be some way you do something where you can get an on-ramp of your content onto something legitimate, something that's already established. And give your reason for the other platforms that have been existing in perpetuity, basically. You want people to still watch cable and watch network. There are still audiences that can go there. Not so much cable network anymore, but cable still can. And if you do that, okay, because remember, all these cable outlets mostly have streaming services as well. And then you move it to the major streamers. But you don't want to do that yet. But you can. The movie theaters already have taken the suit, right? Because right now, movies are doing pretty well. There's still some movies that are lacking right now that are not making as much money. Listen, Little Mermaid made a lot of money, almost $100 million last week, but they're not running in China. And that's a problem for them. Fast and Furious, Fast 10, they're going to break $1 billion. Guardians of the Galaxy, 750, but that's a pretty good haul for them. And there's still movies left to come up for the summer. You got The Flash in 2 weeks. You got Mission Impossible next month. There's a lot of good stuff coming up, man. And people are going. Hell, my movie theater packed to the gills the last couple of weeks. Fast X, every concession stand full. And 7-8 people in line. Or 7-8 families in line, excuse me. Same thing for Little Mermaid. Boatload of people. Boatload. So it tells me that the movie theaters are kind of getting much better than was before. Now, where we are with what Hollywood could do better, or what these media corporations can be doing better to get their content out, they hedged all their bets on streaming, and they're losing right now. Let's create ad-supported models now, ad-supported tiers. We got to do that. We got to do something else with the content. And they're not marketing the content; they're not promoting it. Well, that's the problem with the movies. They're not promoting it much at all either. You get some of it. Like, I mean, during the NBA Finals, hell, there are movies that get promoted. Ooh, Oppenheimer promoted a lot, which is good. Same thing for Boogeyman. Same thing for, I think Mission Impossible. I'm not sure. Yeah, I think Mission Impossible as well, right? That's what needs to happen. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, same thing. You got to get those movies promoted. They got to put some marketing money out there. They need to go and get some other places for people to go start watching the shows. Give them something to make people go ahead and make the investment to subscribe. Because remember, now you have people that are actually going out and doing other things, and they're not going to go ahead and do what they did with cable and spend on multiple streamers. They're not. Devin Zasloff last week, he said it. Bundle. So Disney bundling so much more. Warner Bros. Discovery together with Max. You might not like the name, but the content they got a lot of. And remember, we're talking about with Max and HBO content. It's a lot of quality content. Hell, I just got my father to finally start watching The Wire because he never watched it before. And he's already in the 5 episodes already. He's already getting into it like, wow, all these people, he's watching all these other shows. You know, they were all on The Wire. Yeah, they were. Great show. Fantastic. Now, moving along, the Directors Guild is now negotiating their contract with the AMPTP. Only a few days left before the studios are scheduled to begin talks with the Screen Actors Guild, SAG-AFTRA. So, the Directors Guild is focused primarily on getting a better deal on streaming residuals with a formula that will account for the growth in international subscribers. The Writers Guild is interested in such a formula as well, but has other demands, which is the minimum staff size for TV writers' rooms, a minimum number of weeks per show, provisions on artificial intelligence, and a streaming formula that pays more for popular shows. The Directors Guild is not believed to be pursuing those other items. The Writers Guild issued a joint statement with other Hollywood unions expressing support for a fair contract for the Directors Guild, that it would benefit every worker in the industry, and the Directors Guild had unique priorities. Since the outset of the strike, writers have been told the Directors Guild probably will get a deal, but that such a deal will not resolve the strike because it will not address most of the writers' issues. And that's what they're talking about. So there's that part. Now, as for the writers and what they've been doing to kind of get things moving, well, the shut-it-down strategy. Executives are conceding privately that it has been effective. So the picket lines and the way they've been going after, not just going out picketing in front of studios, but picketing in front of production that is still going on. Like really pushing the picket line into the production facilities has really been effective. The Writers Guild strike captain Warren Light, who is a veteran showrunner of Law & Order SVU, is losing sleep to make sure a TV program doesn't make it to air. So we talked about when they went to block the show Billions, and they had 24 people out at 2 a.m., and that was back on May 24th, which was the recent expansion from show of force protests to corporate headquarters to more disruptive actions meant to affect bottom lines and reorient power dynamics. The strategy emerged from the membership's rank and file, and the guild brass now realizes it's a pretty powerful thing. Listen, are the unions doing the right thing by encouraging this kind of behavior? I don't know. I would say not. Because what's going to happen is negotiation might go through, but man, you're going to talk about the writers. They are towing a line here on how far they can go. Because the unions can also push them to go do what they need to do. But let me tell you, if they think that they're going to push too far, Hollywood could go ahead and budge and say, you know what, we're going to get scabs. We could go for somebody else to write this content, or people that could just be, applicable to help us with some AI technology, and we'll just write it ourselves. We'll find some robotic technology to create the same scripts we've been paying you guys for. The writers have to be cognizant of how far they can push the envelope on all this. The whole idea they're saying is to empty the content pipeline. Closures have crossed the country from Loot to Good Trouble in Los Angeles to The Chai in Chicago and Evil in New York. And the focus on shutdowns is a remarkable shift for the Writers Guild. Back in 2007-2008, it found itself far more isolated and at odds with nominal labor allies. No equivalent strategy was on. Now the Guild finds itself the beneficiary of unity and alignment with the fractious Hollywood worker caucus of other unions, each nursing their own set of, at times, overlapping grievances and eager to soften the ground for their own contract negotiations. So on average, a lost day of production for a Hollywood production costs companies between $200,000 and $300,000. Insurance policies don't cover shutdowns caused by the strike. And Allianz, which is a leading industry underwriter, it says it's still early days and too soon to speculate on any impact on future insurance premiums. And some in-progress productions abandoned during the strike may not return when it's over. Some top company decisions makers say. So production that was being done might not even be completed to be pushed out. Considerations will include the number of remaining episodes left to film the season, availability of cast, and importance of show to its platform. So multiple high-level executives spoke to the Hollywood Reporter under a condition of anonymity, and they said it's being effective. An ongoing cat-and-mouse game. Rapid response units of Writers Guild members mobilized to pick at studio gates, location shoot sites based on tip-offs, and LA location permits are public record, and neighborhood filming notices are posted ahead of production. Production activities released 48 hours after it has ended, and some of that actionable information is originating from sympathetic members of other unions. So yeah, so there are people outside that are still working their jobs, but tipping off the unions to know what's going on so they can go ahead and picket. Not just picket the studios, but picket where they're filming. It's much more escalated level than ever before. One programmer observes the shutdowns are putting crew members out of work for projects for which the writers have already been paid. Who are they really hurting? Is it really hurting the studios? Not really. The sentiment is also echoed by a top executive that says it's all expense driven, saves them all taxes. They talked to a veteran showrunner and a longtime Writers Guild member that if it's saving them money, shutting all shows down and getting out of showbiz will really save them all the money. And another seasoned studio player says that financial upside is short term. The whole point of a studio is to be in production. There were projections of what those stop shows would make. For us, that's a loss. Now, there's more about the idea of how you do things in terms of doing all this unionizing in solidarity and how strong it is because they're all in solidarity right now with what they want to do, which, yeah, they're doing that right now. It's helping. But is it going to go too far? So on-location filming of scripted TV shows grinds to a near-complete halt in LA. And we've talked about what's been done. Week ending May 28th, number of permits taken up by film and TV projects were down 62%. Last week, on-location filming plunged 51% from a year ago. 5 scripted TV shows taking out permits. 3 of those projects were reported in the news to have ceased production. So we're getting shows that are getting shut down as well. That's where all this happening, man. It's breaking itself down and it's being effective. So keep that in mind. So we talked about the Writers Guild and actually working in solidarity right now with the AMPTP. We talked about the gaslighting. And when it comes down to it, there are no real answers to do anything about this. And so I'll tell you, it's not going to stop there. There's a couple other stories to bring up. Netflix is not without in this as well. They're also in some issues. So here's what we got from this. Netflix shareholders declined to support the pay packages in 2023 for top executives at the annual shareholder meeting on Thursday. And the pay proposal was put up for a vote. And it was pertaining to the senior level executives, co-CEOs Greg Peters and Ted Sarandos, and co-founder and board chair here, Reed Hastings. The vote wouldn't ultimately prevent executives from collecting as expected, but it's a rare public rebuke of the compensation of media executives And the Writers Guild had urged shareholders to give a thumbs down to the pay scheme. So the Writers Guild wanted to make sure that the top 3 executives at Netflix did not get compensation packages, a bump in pay. Wow. Now, Netflix compensation has not always go over well. They say in this deadline report that before the strike, Netflix compensation, 27% of shareholders last year supported the pay plan in 2022. And then Netflix implemented a number of changes. So they make a lot of money, by the way. Reed Hastings, he gets about $50 million a year. And at the moment, Hastings, Sarandos and Peter get a salary of $3 million. Sarandos would get $20 more million in stock and a bonus of up to $17 million, depending on whether certain targets are hit. Peters has a stock reward of $17.3 million and a bonus of up to $14.3 million. It's a lot of money for those guys, but hey, CEOs are supposed to make their money, right? They make their money for a reason. But the Writers Guild, hey, they're going to go ahead and they're going to stir the pot right now and make the shareholders make Netflix hurt as well in the same way. They're also doing the same thing to Comcast because Comcast will have their own annual meeting next week and they're going to make them do the same thing. This is solidarity at work. Is it right? Is it not right? Hey, I'm not here to say anything about that. But you know what? That tells you how strong this is right now. There's the other story that you got to pay attention to. Independent commercial producers. The Teamsters are getting on now into the trying to increase their union power. How about this? So now a story comes out. There's a battle between the Teamsters and the Association of Independent Commercial Producers. So the Teamsters and the AICP are right now in negotiations over wage increases, greater overtime compensation, and more to avert a strike next month. Teamsters Local 399 have a self-described week of action to kick things into high gear. With about 500 members on average annually that work on commercials, Local 399 wants to see the AICP agree to further talks in the next week. They're not scheduled to meet until June 19th, less than 2 weeks before the current contract expires. The labor leader for the Teamsters says that they're not wanting to give our members the fair wages they deserve. We're ready to take a commercial break. If we're provoked, we will strike. Another union set to strike as well, Teamsters. There are 2 separate contracts that play simultaneously between the Teamsters and the AICP. One covers drivers, wranglers, animal handlers, and trainers, hyphenated drivers, and others cover location scout managers in commercials. They're still pretty far apart, according to a source familiar with what's going on. With inflation on the rise, the biggest priority is wages. Talked to one of the drivers they talked to, who's on the bargaining committee for talks. And they talk about the fact that in the cases where companies we're working for are corporations like Apple, Amazon, AT&T, Home Depot, Verizon, and Toyota, to name a few. These companies have been making gargantuan profits in the last few years. They can't do that without workers like us showing up job after job and doing the work. All we're asking is being paid a fair wage appropriate for the hard hours we work and the high cost of living in Los Angeles. Bingo. And the Hollywood Teamsters, their current contract with the studios expires next year. A lot of Hollywood workers are willing to go on strike. That is more solidarity than you could ever imagine. So this is a big deal. We're going to continue to follow this. Probably do another update in another month because that's when everybody will start talking about it again. And we'll see what happens with it. But I would be weary of what comes of all of this coming up. This is not good for a lot of people. Like, listen, what's going to happen to the fall TV season, to all the new shows that come up, all the content that's not going to be available? Because what's going to ultimately happen is, the longer this goes, there will be shows that will no longer be in production, and there will be scripted shows that will be delayed. Content that Netflix and Amazon and Apple and Paramount and Hulu and Peacock and Disney Plus and Max are all depending on. They're not going to have anything for those people to watch. So the streamers are going to be left with what? What's left up there? Are they going to want to pay that price? They're all paying for new content. They all are. You can't just have a repository up there and expect people to go and pay the prices you're paying. You're not. Okay. A few things I want to go and talk about when it comes to, well, let me do. I want to do music first, or I want to do, no, we could do music first. And then we'll go to radio, because I took a lot of time on radio the last few weeks. I'm taking a break. We have radio to talk about. Don't get me wrong. There is a few things to bring up, but I will hold off on that, not bring it up right now. We'll table it for the end of the show. But there are some music things going on. A story came out this week from Elias Slide at Billboard. Are major labels cooling on viral artists? So we got to bring up this story. Now, they're saying after years of paying for songs going viral on social media label strategies are starting to wane. They're starting to change. Isn't that interesting? Well, we've been talking about how the record labels, especially last year, remember they had all these artists they wanted to go and have that somebody has to go viral for then artists to go ahead and get their album released or get a single published and out there and pushed. But there's a problem with that. So they bring up a story about a rapper called Superstar Pride. He put a 19-second clip of TikTok of a summer song called Painting Pictures. Was basically unknown. But thanks to TikTok, it quickly passed 1 million views. And by February 9th, it had gotten over 100. The streams went from negligible to over 130,000. And then 8 days later, he posted another video, Superstar Pride, and the streams ballooned to more than 4 million. And Pride made the rounds. Every label was talking to him, but at the end, he announced he was staying with United Masters, which initially distributed the single. Some artists prefer the independent route. And so this independent artist was finding tremendous success without needing to give up his rights to a record company. Now, some of the music industry saw this episode as a demonstration of the major labels' more cautious approach to viral phenomena. One executive says that 3-4 years ago, if the bidding war had happened, undoubtedly it would have come to fruition. Somebody would have made the rapper an offer that was too big for him to turn down. But some labels are disillusioned with their viral pickups. There have been a lot of losses. And buyers are going to be a little more deliberate. Yeah, they're abandoning going after the next viral sensation. So that last couple of years, they were doing that. During interviews, executives described the process of combing through heaps of songs and artist data from streaming and social media platforms, identifying tracks with hockey stick graphs, numbers racing up and to the right, and screwing to lock in a deal before their competitors. Privately, some expressed surprise their job seemed to similar to stock trading. Others criticized the strategy as basically buying up market share but foregoing the tough work of artist development. Yeah. You can't always expect a star to be made out of something viral. They're not going to be all Little Nas X, okay? Every big label had access to information from the social media partners more or less, so speedy outreach to artists was essential. But now, 2019, 2020, 2021, felt like every single day another artist signed a gazillion-dollar deal. People are spending huge on sound effect records. And as we talked about, Old Town Road, Little Nas X. Even with a massive supply of data, the forecasting the future remain notoriously difficult. And robust streaming for one single may say nothing about the fate of the artist's follow-up. Because they want to be able to get an album off of them. Listen, it's the same thing that goes with these rappers. The corporate owned and bought rappers that will put out one album and then gone. Who knows? They go to jail. Something else happens to them. They die. Something goes wrong. But that's what happens. So they're not willing to go that route and deal with the fact that, okay, they're not finding artists with longevity, which means they're not finding artists that have quality. That's a big problem here. Meanwhile, the music industry is also dealing with other things, and you know what? People have their own agenda to talk about that they're worried about. So with that said, there's a story that came out from Billboard about diversity, equity, and inclusion. The efforts are already backsliding. And Gail Mitchell at Billboard says, we can't let that go. So let's see what this is all about. And I'm not even sure. Well, and the thing is, upon finding this story, I really say to myself, we've talked about diversity on this program in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion, in terms of what music is out there and what it was like before. If I go back and look at the archives of the program, I remember doing a whole show about it. And so myself, really? Is there really a feeling like that? And I'm not sure. Okay, here to go. Let me go back. I said it March 18th of this year, episode 270. When music was diverse and inclusive, now the crossover needs to come back. And remember we talked about the story from, what was it, Janisha Jones, who did a guest column for Billboard back in March. And that the music industry has perpetuated a system, quote, that benefits a select few at the expense of marginalized communities. And I looked back at the music crossover used to serve that purpose. And I went through the Billboard Hot 100 hits through time. I talked about the diversity of the music from the 70s being more than the 80s. And I made the argument. I made the case. The evidence is there. But here we are, another story in the same realm being brought up again. But there's just this need to go ahead and make this point across. So let's go to this now. So now, Gail Mitchell here writes and says that, you know, she's been with Billboard since 1999. Countless hip-hop and R&B acts have poured their hearts out on stage to share their hard-won journeys off stage. And then they talked about, in June 2020, there was the hashtag, the show must be paused, which made the music business come to a standstill for a day of racial reckoning. A high time to reverse decades of systemic bias practiced by an industry that has become disproportionately wealthy through the efforts of black people, their music, and culture. So there are some C-suite appointments for some black executives in these recording labels, right? But there's too many examples of exasperating tone deafness. Motown Records has reintegrated under their sister label Capitol Records, and accompanying staff layoffs during Black History Month following the departure of their chairwoman and CEO, Ethiopia Habtemariam. And then it was Capitol's racist black virtual robot rapper artist FN Mecca. And black music executives and creators I've spoken to over the last 18 months say the black sliding is already happening. One major label black senior executive told Billboard, quote, I don't need another initiative that's conceived, developed, executed, and resourced by black executives. There needs to be a through line of white executives doing this. We need to see them put value to the things we do that have derived value for them. Until we see a consistent basis across the board, we're not really going to see that change. And what have I said about this particular subject? You're only going to get the changes you want in a community if that community is represented not by people you think are supposed to represent you, by representation of like-minded, of the individuals. The point is, there have to be more black executives. And by the way, if they're not going to play ball with the music labels, then there has to be somebody else, entrepreneurial sense, that needs to put money and funding to create new labels to counteract. See, back in the 60s, 70s, and the 80s, remember, we had a lot of labels that were we didn't have the conglomerations that we have now. We had plenty of record labels that were out there that serviced everybody. They got all picked up. When you talk about, the late 90s, sure, Def Jam was around, but what about Priority? What about Ruthless? What about Luke Records? What about Slip and Slide? What about Stax? I mean, if you go back in the 70s, what about Stax Records? What about, there was a lot of, you had artists that were really taken care of. But these big corporations are not going to play along because they're going to look at their charts. They're going to say, oh, the black community represents 13% of the population. We're going to go after the mainstream. And they're going to represent what they're going to represent. And sure, some of the things they're going to be doing are probably going to be performative, but that's what you're going to get because you think you're going to listen to these people that are executives that are not black and think they're going to play along. Look at the money we're making for them. Well, you're not going to change their mind because you have to understand who's running the show. And who runs the show? You need to continue to run the plight of bringing more people that are like-minded and alike. These executives need to start bringing more executives into the fold, bringing more people into their fold that will also become executives, and then continue to acquire C-level positions. That's how you make change. Now, Gail Mitchell says, we can't let DEI just become another flavor of the month. We need to renew the pledge in 2020 to make the black music community meaningful and rightfully deserve systemic change can happen. I'm sorry, Gail. You need more people in the boardroom, not outside protesting, not doing a social media campaign. This is performative. It's not real change. It might be well intended, but it's not real change. Listen, I'm in for this, but you have to just get people that are on board that are going to bring in the right kind of people on board, okay? Executives in power. It's just like with when you want to talk about something where there's representation in Washington, D.C. You need people that are representing the communities out there. And not the ones that can become corrupt and just, all right, they get fat-catted and then, you know what, they don't want to deal with helping anybody back that was oppressed or underrepresented or misaligned in the community they came from. They forget where they come from. No, you want people that don't forget where they come from and they bring people in. They pull other people in to be a part of it. It's what's going to change. This right here is not going to make changes. It's just not. But maybe they'll understand that sometime. I don't know. Now it's time to talk about radio. Now, I'm a broken record. I can tell you how many times have I talked about if the only radio I listen to right now at all is BBC Radio 1. I listen to them 3 hours a week. I listen to Jack Saunders and the official chart countdown. Hour and a half. Hour and 45 minutes. And they will go through not all 40 songs, about 25 of them. But it's a very great way of presenting the chart. And the official chart, which is such a great chart that is really viral and very trending. You find the music that's really trending out there and it's really representing what the people are listening to, streaming, downloading, buying, or, watching. That's what they do with the official chart, and it works. And by the way, the proof is in the pudding. Commercial radio in the UK now has a record weekly audience of 38.7 million people, according to quarterly figures from commercial radio industry body Rajar. You know why commercial radio has that? Because they're going up against the BBC. BBC does a great job of programming, and the competition to go up against them. Now, imagine if NPR, with all their money and all their prowess, they quit doing all this talk programming, and they went to music. Could you imagine if NPR and the effort they could put into music programming, imagine all these commercial radio stations, the competition would be immense. And commercial radio would have to change. iHeartRadio would actually have to start putting some money and resources and actually start allowing programming to flourish. I think NPR, if they had the chance to do more music programming, newer, current programming, and took what the record labels are putting out there and they put out more programming, I think they would do an excellent job. I actually think would do really well as a national format. Imagine if NPR would allow some of the radio stations to be broadcasting as such. And it doesn't matter whether you're on the FM dial. Oh, just because you're above 92 kilohertz. I don't give a shit. Commercial radio is now up 3.3% up from the first quarter of 2022. 51%. The share of commercial radio listening is now at 28%, which is the first time it's surpassed analog listening on AM/FM. Total combined digital listening, 68%, 39% DAB or digital, 24.4% online. And by the way, the BBC also, now they can boast 6 million listeners more commercial radio does than the BBC, up from 3.4 million. Combined weekly audience for all radio in the UK, 49.4 million people, or 88% of the adult population. It's a lot of people listening. But like I said, because commercial radio in the UK, they have real competition, which is a government-owned national source that does great content. BBC 2, 3, 4, 5, all of them. They give out good quality content. They have real DJs on there, real entertaining folks, and they do a good job. For instance, I remember I was complaining about Jack Saunders doing the official chart when they switched from him to Scott Mills, from Scott Mills to him in September last year. And you know what? We're now 6 months in, or actually, 9 months in? Jack Saunders is good now. he was a good DJ on doing the Future Sound show. Don't get me wrong. But now he's figured out how to do the chart show. It's much better. Okay. Vic Hope, Katie Thistleton doing the official chart first look on Sundays. Now it's changing them because they're not going to be together. But you know what? Those two girls, great chemistry. Listening to a radio show and I laugh. I actually get a giggly. Listen to those two talking because they're great. They got great chemistry on the air. They say some funny stuff and they're just quirky and I love it. And they got all this great music to play. Like, that's good radio. What do we have here? What's the American radio market looking like? Well, you know, we're talking about we're talking about AM radio. And AM radio still has a chance to do something because let me tell you this. New York Daily News actually put out a story. Well, LA Radio News, right? LA Daily News, excuse me. They put out a radio story. And they talked about the AM radio could be getting a rebirth and improve if industry would just listen. So this is a story that came from Richard Wagner. We've talked about him before. SoCalRadioWaves.com. And he talked about the story of WABC in New York, which has been a talk station since the 1982. And right now, WABC was owned by Cumulus Media, and they sold the station to John Katzimatidis, who owns the Grossetti's grocery chain in New York City. He's brought a dead radio station back to life, making it local, serving local audience, embracing older listeners, and super serving those who are willing to tune in. And the station's been doing better. They have was a 3.0 share for the last 6 months, and now a 3.9 share for the last 2 months. Top rated AM station in New York. Bigger than any corporate outlet. So they talk about what they've done on WABC to get people to listen. They found an audience that was underserved, designed a format that would appeal to that audience, an eclectic mix of talk, news, and music. With the music, they brought back Cousin Brucey, when WABC was an all-music station and playing all hit music in the 50s, between the 60s and 70s. And Cousin Brucey was one of the major voices behind that. They run the old iconic jingles. The news coverage is on a local area. And the talk hosts have local ties. And Katzimatidis has his own show hosted by himself and local broadcaster Rita Cosby. And so New York is the biggest, toughest market to get people to listen. But he's able to do it. He's been able to make an AM station successful. While Odyssey, second biggest company in the country, they started shutting down some of their AM stations. Richard makes the point. FM stations could definitely use more local content, and in the cases where the local audience is super served, results are impressive. Local content is the one thing that Spotify, Apple Music, or any other streaming service simply can't match. If you have local radio and the local talent are the tastemakers of new music or music out there to discover music, this will make a bigger difference. And then you make relevant radio again. But they're not going to do that yet. But things can happen that can hopefully change it. Hopefully. So iHeartRadio put out a story about, well, there was a memo that was leaked talking about what they're going to be doing in terms of their AI policies and plans going forward. Perry Michael Simon, who was a former guest on the program, if you didn't get a chance to listen, by the way, I have the full interview with him over on my YouTube channel at King of Podcasts. You can find it there. So Bob Pittman and Rich Bressler warn employees not to use ChatGPT on company devices or submit any company information to AI platforms without permission. And that our media will be putting out their own specific AI solutions, allowing us to get all the benefits of AI, while at the same time be able to protect our information and our intellectual property. They want to be, at the same time, they want to be able to be smart about how we implement these tools to protect ourselves, our partners, our company's information, and our user data. So they're going to use AI. They're going to use their own AI, proprietary. And the company's already using AI in certain areas of the company with great results. And they're excited about expanding that to make everyone's work faster, more industry. Yeah, because they want to use the technology for the few people left that are working at iHeartMedia after all the layoffs. Less is more. Less is more. The National Association of Broadcasters obviously trying to put their push across to get Congress to follow suit and not allow the music industry to force the radio stations to pay royalties. Well, 21 members of the House of Representatives and 2 senators have added their support to the Local Radio Freedom Act, opposing any new fees or changes on local broadcast radio stations, including new performance royalties on radio stations. 188 co-sponsors in the House, 23 in the Senate so far. And they say it overshadows any support for the record industry's American Music Fairness Act, trying to slap broadcasters with extra royalty charges. Okay. I still think there's something about if the record labels could get the radio stations to pay. Let me tell you, radio lobbying is strong. But I want to see what happens now. There are some issues that are going on right now. The American Music Fairness Act music has stalled. The main support group, Music First, had a sudden change of leadership. So they're trying to say there's some volatility and there's a bit of weakness right now on the opposing side of the bills that are being pushed across for the AMFA. We'll keep an eye on this because eventually one of these have to get passed. Of course, I'm going to support the American Music Fairness Act because I think radio stations need to pay. And if they can't pay, then give the stations away. Give them up because you can't afford them anymore. If it ultimately affects the corporate terrestrial giants, let's do it. I'm all in for that. Okay, one last story I want to bring up. Podcasting information. And so we have some more information coming out. The first ever Gen Z podcast listener report, done by SXM Media and Edison Research. They show that nearly half of 13 to 24-year-olds in the U.S. have listened to a podcast in the last month, estimating 24 million Gen Z U.S. monthly podcast listeners. And those listeners are heavily engaged, as 3 in 4 have listened to podcasts within the last week. Younger listeners, 13 to 17, are even more engaged, with 80% listening in the past week. 46% are female. That's up from 2018. And also, podcast listeners are more diverse than the general population of podcast listeners. And also in the study, they said that over 40% are looking for diverse perspectives that are different from their own, as well as include stories and perspectives from people in their own generation. Interesting. Just a little bit of food for thought. But let's talk about podcasting. So maybe for those of you that are 13 to 24 and you're finding this show, thank you so much. I know. I've seen the numbers. The Broadcasters Podcast viewers are a little older demographic because of the media types and the people that listen to this program. It's more of an industry-based program more than it is a commercial-based program. Like, I've tried to put out extra stuff when it comes to it, when there's a good time about it. Listen, I'm happy that sometimes some of my content does get viral. Like the Peso Pluma episode and talking about the regional Mexican music, that thing blew up. Thank you for that. I really appreciate that. It's sometimes I do get hit on a good topic, but some other content's doing really good. I'm happy about that. And by the way, I want to go and shout out one of our listeners here of the program, who always is very good to me, to always going to promote it out there on Twitter and other places. I want to shout out Lou Pate. He's a veteran radio journeyman. He's worked on stations all over the country. He actually worked for a while on Fox News Radio. He also worked, in various markets: Denver, Miami, San Diego, Phoenix, New York. There's a lot of places he worked, and a lot of syndicated programming he's also worked on as well. He's good people. I'm actually kind of working with him on, throwing some ideas at him for a new podcast he's going to be hosting. And if and when he decides to go ahead and put that show together, I'm helping him flesh out the details. Like I said, it's up to him. But I have some good ideas on what to do that hopefully he'll take on. And once he does get ready to go and put it out there, I'll probably go and offer a branch to him to have him come on and, preview the show. Because I think it would be a great idea to go and do that. See if he can get on the show and, get some other appearances out there. Be in the guest seat for a change. The guy's hosted so many programs. So many hours behind the microphone hosting. So to be the guest side is also different, a different change of pace. So Lou, if you're listening to this, you're catching it at the end of the show. Yes. Once you get your show all set up, I'm going to bring you on. We're going to talk. All right. That's the program for tonight. And I appreciate all of you for catching the episode and listening in. Broadcasters Podcast. You'll find all the descriptions, all the details, the links, everything that you need will be there on the website for this episode and all the other ones. And also just keep in mind too, you can also find me on social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all over the place. You could find more of that at broadcasterspodcast.com. All the links are there, but also, like I said, at King of Podcasts, that's all my social media. You can find me all over there. And there's so much more. And I appreciate you listening in. We'll follow the union stuff going forward, and everything else in music, movies, TV, and radio on the next episode. But until then, remember that content is king, and the control of your content is in your hands.